For the next hour, deepen your shade of green. This is the Shades of Green radio show, featuring the latest in technology, money-saving ideas, legislative updates, and all things green. The Shades of Green radio show is presented by the Green Alliance. Now here's your hosts, Paul Ira and Stan Hannell.
Good morning. This is Shades of Green radio show on KDWN 720 AM and 101.5 FM, simulcast right here in the Valley of Sun and Sin. Only FM talk radio. So this morning we have Jennifer Taylor from New Economy West Consulting, and she is also a Green Alliance board member and scribe with Green Alliance. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Paul.
And of course, our now famous co-host, the best co-host in the building, Stan Hannell.
Thank you.
Good morning, Stan. So today we're talking legislative issues, and as we're spooling up to the show today, we're talking about how only the geeks in this room used to talk about energy issues when it comes to legislation, and now it has become kind of a big issue, and there are lots of energy issues coming up in legislation with Question 3 and Question 6, and there'll be other questions, I'm sure, about these questions. So that's why we're here. So today we're going to start and have Jennifer tell us a little bit about herself and her background and why she thinks she's so green and her interest in this. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Paul. I've always been interested in sustainability, and I've always been interested in all things green. I was a board member for another conservation organization for a long time. And then I was the executive director for an organization called Clean Energy Project. And that's really where I started to learn about renewable energy and all these sort of very technical issues. I'm also a lawyer, so I get to dig into legislation and really understand what some of the policies mean and what the policy implications are. I was a member of the Governor's Committee on Energy Choice. I was a member of one of the working groups for the Governor's New Energy Industry Task Force. And I spent a lot of time in 2017 working on the 11 bills that were passed out of the legislature related to energy and to advanced technologies and clean technologies and advanced energy issues and disruptive technologies that impact our energy world.
So let's start there. In 2017, several bills were passed that were good things that overturned some things that happened in 2015. Bring us up to speed on that.
So there were 11 bills passed. 2 were vetoed by the governor, and those were specifically the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard Bill, which was AB 206, which would have increased our renewable portfolio standard to a 40% by 2030 as opposed to a 25% by 2025. The other bill that was vetoed was Community Solar Bill. That was Senate Bill 392, and we'll talk about those 2 issues in regards to what's coming up. Bills that came out of the session in 2017 included things related to storage, integrating our distributed energy resources into long-term planning, a couple bills on energy efficiency, bills related to renewable incentives, including electric vehicles. But the big one I think that you're wanting me to get to is AB 405, which was the rooftop solar bill. And I think that the entire rooftop solar issue is what really catapulted energy and clean energy and these disruptive technologies and how we get our energy to sort of a public zeitgeist where it was just in the norm and in the discussion of everyday folks as opposed to just wonks.
And just there was real world money involved. People were looking at rooftop solar to save them money in the long term and be good for their environment, and then all of a sudden there were roadblocks and
we had a lot of people buying solar for their homes, and we were smiling. All of us geeks in this room were smiling because renewable was starting to grow some legs underneath it.
Right.
And before 2015 legislation, Nevada was the number 1 renewable energy employer in the United States.
Per capita,
And then 2015, what happened?
2015, a bill was passed, the Lone Energy Bill in that session, by the way, that there was a cap on rooftop in the installations of rooftop solar. It was like a percentage of the entire load. They switched that to a megawatt cap, and then they sent it to the Public Utility Commission for the Public Utility Commission to determine what was an appropriate tariff or what was the appropriate payback for folks who had rooftops sending energy into the grid. The sort of 2 big issues that came out of that really caused this turmoil and kerfuffle in the industry was, number one, the Public Utility Commission took everybody that had rooftop, not the folks that had installed rooftop up to the date of their ruling. Like they didn't grandfather in. So that was one of the biggest issues, because there were 20,000 or something rooftops and interconnections that were expecting to have a certain payback based on their interconnection agreement with NV Energy.
For like 20 years, like a power purchase agreement in a way.
It was a power, well, it wasn't, that's only for the lease models, Stan. For the people who purchased, it was just a straight interconnection. So there were two models of rooftop. There was, number one, you outright purchase it, and then that means that you have a direct agreement with the utility to give them your energy, you get credits back from the utility. The other model, which is what really launched a huge number of interconnections and a huge number of homes with rooftop on it, was the lease model. That was something that was done really through Solar City, Sunrun, Vivint, some of those big national companies. And
so that's where people are paying a lease over the
Correct.
years, maybe a 25-year agreement, instead of purchasing the units up front and owning them.
But more importantly, what it did was, the reason that they were getting those leases is that they no longer had an agreement that they no longer were buying their power essentially from the utility. They were in a power purchase agreement, as Stan referenced, directly with Sunrun or Solar City or whoever. So that Solar City, I will just use them because they were the biggest corporation in this model of market. But we'll get to that after the break, because it is important to understand how all of this happened.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but we're going to sort that all out when we come back.
Right.
Shades of Green on KDWN. We'll be right back. Good morning, and we are back to Shades of Green on KDWN 720 AM and 101.5 FM here in Las Vegas. Today we have Jennifer Taylor from New Economy West Consulting, and she's also a board member with Green Alliance and their scribes. So we're talking legislation and trying to come up to speed from a little history. Prior to 2015, Nevada was the number one employer of renewable energy jobs in the United States. And then some 2015 legislation altered the net metering and some tax credits, and people started running from it. And actually, companies started running from Nevada. And then in 2017, we had a new bill come out that kind of corrected all that. Why don't you bring us up to speed on that bill, Jennifer?
Sure. That was AB 405, which was sponsored by Assemblyman Chris Brooks. It was originally sponsored by Assemblyman Justin Watkins, but Chris Brooks, who is our fantastic legislative champion on energy, really helped shape what that ended up looking like and how that brought the solar industry back into being the economic driver that it was prior to 2015. So what it did was it reestablished the one-to-one credit. I'm sorry, it didn't reestablish the one-to-one credit. It set a system where there was no cap on rooftop solar installations, which had been one of the issues before 2015, before the PUC, undertook its docket in late 15 and early 2016. So AB 405 opened it up so there was no cap. Anybody can get rooftop solar if they want. But in exchange for that, what they did was they set up tranches. So anybody who had a system prior to the implementation of AB 405, which was July of 2017, would be grandfathered in at pre-existing rates, which was basically the one-to-one credit that existed before 2015. And then after that, as installations came on in, I think it's 200 megawatt tranches, the next 200 megawatts that were installed would get 95% of that payback, which really was a great way for the industry to be able to go back and say to folks, you're getting 95% of your credit sent in. And made it really economically viable. Then it goes down to 88%, 81%, 75% in 80 megawatt steps. So
the lowest would be 75%, I think.
Right, 75%. Yep, that's the lowest.
So tell me this, for my edification, why was there ever a cap? It was growing so slowly. It's not like they would blow suddenly the energy company can't generate energy
but think
anymore.
about it, Paul. Part of the reason there was, it initially was growing really slowly because it was mostly purchases only, and that was a very expensive investment until the price of rooftop solar started to really come down, and until the lease model that we were talking about came into the fore, because that really gave a lot of people opportunities to install rooftop solar and take advantage of those savings and give them the opportunity to be more green. But until that system, until that economic model was created innovatively, not everybody could do it. And so I think the cap, just like with any, I don't know, I wasn't really involved in legislation before 2015, but that cap, I think, was intended to let the industry grow in sort of a measured and sustainable, smart way.
Yeah,
so
and I think any cap in legislation, it does kind of set in an automatic review when you get
Right.
close to that cap, which should have
Yeah.
happened. Yeah, but I think 2014 was almost like a gold rush in solar, though. Things were coming so fast that NV Energy couldn't even process the
Well,
orders that were coming in. I think.
even in 2015, Stan, when you look at the number of those lease model rooftops that went in 2015, even after the session started, and even after there was a knowledge that there was going to be a cap and there was going to be a review. But that's all history, and that's important history, so that we understand that energy issues are constantly in flux, and we need, as citizens who care about these issues, to watch what's going on at the Public Utility Commission and watch what's going on at the legislature, and be mindful of how our legislators are shaping our energy policy, because Nevada really has the ability to continue to lead in clean technology, in clean energy, and solar, and all of those things. So, I would just say that AB 405 really fixed the system. The industry's back up and running. I had people, even though I have solar, I had people come to my door to try to sell me solar. So they, this is something that we can now look at proudly and say, this got fixed in 2017. We had some, hiccups, and we ironed it out. And we just need to make sure that no matter what happens with other issues, for example, question 3, which is the Energy Choice Initiative that would seek to unbundle how we get our energy, we want to make sure that those policies and those priorities are things that the state still focuses on and still looks at as important goals for how we do our energy policy.
So currently, the AB 405 fixed the solar issue. So now it's a good idea again. The jobs are coming back. The companies are coming back. I don't know where we stand as far as employment for renewable energy, but it's got to have increased. I don't know if we're the leaders anymore, but that could be.
I think we're back.
Are we back?
I think that we're back in sort of the top 5. But I mean, there's a lot of other issues too besides rooftop that have really made us stand out, and those are things like
community solar.
Community solar is, so we can talk about community solar, because community solar is a way that folks that don't
that don't own the rooftops can have
that don't own the rooftops, that don't have the right orientation on the rooftops, that don't have the financing, whether it's, because remember, even if you purchase it, you got to have a certain amount of capital. If you lease it, you have to have a certain credit level.
Sure.
And that small communities can have an access to solar. So the community solar bill, it's essentially virtual net metering. You're still kind of looking at a larger system that serves more than one rooftop, and there's still credits back and forth in between the generation and the distribution back and forth. So
Okay.
that bill was presented and was vetoed, but we know that there will be a community solar bill that will come back, and there's been a lot of discussions between some of the energy advocates and the utility to figure out the best way to make community solar work for the community.
Let's continue on here. NRS 704B. Talk about that quickly.
Yeah, NRS 704B is essentially it's a statutory structure that lets any entity that uses 1 megawatt or more of energy to ask the PUC to allow it to purchase its own energy outside of that vertically integrated structure that we have with NV Energy. So right now, NV Energy provides the generation, the distribution, the transmission, and the retailing of energy. You can only buy from NV Energy because they made a deal with the state of Nevada that said, you let us be the exclusive franchise of energy, and we will subject ourselves to regulation on how much we get to charge, on how much we get to recover when we build assets or purchase assets. And, and that's this regulatory compact. So, during the Western energy crisis and the initial sort of round of efforts in Nevada to deregulate that, to unbundle that system.
This was in 2001 when California tried to deregulate. A lot of other states were starting the first wave of it, but they ran into trouble with market manipulation. From
in
Enron,
California in particular.
California,
Thanks for setting that marker there on time frame. So when Nevada stopped working on deregulation, one of the sort of compromise pieces of legislation was this 704B structure. So if you've seen a lot in the news about casinos exiting the system, about Switch exiting the system, about companies exiting. And what it does is it says, you company are sophisticated and large enough that you can go buy your energy out on the wholesale market. But because of our long-term planning process, NV Energy has planned and purchased and done things to accommodate your load. So you need to then pay us an exit fee to make sure that the rest of the ratepayers are not being forced to pay for what was built or acquired to accommodate your large load. So that's essentially 704B in a nutshell. There are a lot of questions and concerns with 704B, and there is a thought that 704B itself was one of the drivers for the Energy Choice Initiative, question 3. So I think that you will hear a lot more discussion about that after the election. I think you'll hear a lot more discussion about 704B and what we need to do to make it transparent, fair, modernized come February when the legislature opens up.
So that's good. The 2017 legislation, we had the mandate for 25%. And now in 2019, we've got some legislation that's going to bump that up a little bit. And we're going to talk about that when we come back. Shades of Green on KDWN. We'll be right back. And we're back to get some of that good information on sustainability, new legislation, and what have you. This is your host, Paul Ira, on Shades of Green. And if our listeners have questions, you can call us on 702-257-5396. That's 702-257-KDWN, the best talk radio in the Valley. So, Jennifer, we're talking about all this legislation and solar and what have you. There's this thing called RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Let's briefly touch on that. And was that, and where do we want to go with that?
So, the Renewable Portfolio Standard is a set of statutes that says this much of Nevada's energy will be provided by renewable sources, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, what have you.
Low-head hydro. So in the past, that was 25%. That was
correct. Currently, we are required to get 25% by 2025.
Per 2017 legislation.
No, that is existing.
That's existing.
And we were, just to give you a little bit of background, Nevada was the second state to introduce an RPS, and we've been moving it up in increments. Last session, Assemblyman Brooks introduced AB 206, which would have increased it to 40% by 2030. That was passed out of the legislature, and then it was vetoed by the governor. And he had a very detailed veto letter with expressing a lot of concerns and reasons why he believes and is supportive of and committed to making Nevada a renewable leader, but because of some of the issues that were circulating around, including question 3, which we'll talk about in a second, he felt that he needed to veto that legislation. So as a result, there was a group that put together a ballot initiative that would, just like question 3, amend the Constitution to require that Nevada generate or acquire 50% of its energy by 2040 from renewable sources. So that is a ballot initiative. It is a constitutional amendment, which means it's on for the first time in 2018, and then it will be on again. If it passes in 2018, it'll be on again in 2020.
So tell us a little bit more about, we need to drill down just a little bit on question 6. So it's going to increase our renewable portfolio standard to require generation of energy up to 50%?
Generation or acquisition of energy.
Or acquisition.
Right. So what that means is it's not just, so the vision is, and I think that what the intent is that it's, generation in the state. That's what everybody wants. Everybody wants us to be able to build things, create jobs, get economic benefits from things we build in the state. But question 6 also has to, the renewable portfolio as it is allows the purchase of credits, anything like that lets an energy provider track energy that's coming in and then being distributed out. If it's renewable, it can either come from generation or from credits.
So to be clear, how much power does Nevada residents power? How much is purchased from out of state?
No, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. But some.
And if we bump this up to 50%, because here's one of the issues: if we start generating all this power with renewable energy, what happens to our power plants? Are they not going to be? They're going to be too big for us. So if we're buying, my point is, if we're buying power from outside now, all that renewable energy will be reducing how much we're buying from outside, and we'll be buying more from in-house or from NV Energy. Now more from them, but less outside purchase.
How question 6 gets, if question 6 passes in 18 and then passes again in 20, how it gets implemented is going to be up to the legislature. What they can do in terms of restrictions on purchases from out of state, requiring generation in state, all of that stuff is going to be up to the legislature. Right now, the power plants that we have in state, there are, if you go and you look at the Governor's Committee on Energy Choice, if you go to the divestment subcommittee, you can see a list of all of the assets that NV Energy has, whether they be fossil fuel assets, there's only a handful of those, or their PPAs, or their direct purchase renewable plants. But that is all. I don't know all of those answers, Paul, but you can find that all on the Governor's Office of Energy under the Governor's Committee on Energy Choice.
But I think the goal is right now 74% of the power plants in the state are natural gas. We maybe have a small percentage of coal left, but you want to transition those to solar farms, I guess. That would be the goal.
Yeah, we don't have that many gas plants in the state. Most of it is imported natural gas on pipelines. Mm-hmm. So, we don't,
we're buying power that way.
We're buying power, we get our energy through natural gas. I guess that does come to the plants, but we're importing the actual resource.
So in a sense, that's buying outside power.
That's buying outside power.
The power is created in the state.
Created here, but
we're
buying outside power to generate it.
But if you look at, to Stan's point, if you go to the Public Utility Commission and you look at NV Energy's current integrated resource plan, which is a 20-year look ahead of how they want to buy energy and how they want to create energy, they currently have proposed 6 solar plants that would be 1,001 megawatts, right, Stan?
I think
of generation that would be solar, and more importantly, solar plus storage. Yeah. So they are really looking at, under the existing system that NV Energy has to comply with to plan for our loads going out 20 years, they are looking at really developing our in-state resources.
Yeah. And so by 2040, then those power purchase agreements that are in place now would expire and then be replaced by the solar that are going in.
So my point about all of this is, as we increase the amount of renewable energy we use in the state, we also increase the number of jobs, because people need to be building this and maintaining it and operating in state.
As long as it is in-state generation and not being and that the portfolio is not being met by credits. If it's out-of-state credits, you're not getting in-state development of jobs.
Okay, so that's important to understand about question 6.
Right.
So that it does increase the amount of renewable energy. It could potentially increase the amount of jobs and improve the economy in Nevada.
Yeah, because anytime if you look at the governor's tax abatement program and you look at some of the data on that, again, Governor's Office of Energy, you can go and look at the renewable tax abatement program. That is a program that has created tons of jobs, incredible billions, literally, of investment. A lot of the projects built under that do send energy out of the state to other places, which is fine, because one of the governor's goals has been making Nevada a leading exporter of energy. So if we sell energy out, that's fantastic.
As we should be. I talk to people all the time about Nevada being the mecca of renewable energy. Right. And if that's the case, then we could generate a lot of revenue by selling energy outside the state through renewable energy projects. So more than just, if we went beyond the 50%, for example, we could sell all that we produce, no problem.
Potentially. Potentially. There's a lot of, it's really, here's one of the other things I just really want to highlight. It's really easy to talk about energy policy in bullet points. The reality is, it is so much more complicated than bullet points. So whenever anybody says, like, more renewables equal more jobs, possibly, potentially, it all depends on how the legislature crafts it, and it all depends on our relationship with our neighboring states. So, It's nice and pithy to talk about energy policy and bullet points, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
So people that are interested in this can definitely go to the Governor's Office of Energy online and get a ton of information.
Yep, the Governor's Office of Energy, the Public Utility Commission, there are a ton of really intense resources that people can learn about how our energy policy truly works.
And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the Gwynn Center and what they think about all of this.
Right.
And we'll be right back. Okay. Shades of Green on KDWN. And we are back. Shades of Green on KDWN, 720 AM and 101.5 FM here in Las Vegas. We have in studio Jennifer Taylor from New Economy West Consulting and a board member on Green Alliance. I want to make it clear to everyone as we talk about these energy issues that there's a lot more information than we can possibly pass in an hour on this radio show. So please go to the Governor's Office of Energy and check out their website, and they've got a lot of great information. And you can look at your own information, too, and Google other states that have deregulated. We're going to talk about question 3, which is the Energy Choice Initiative, which is coming up on the November ballot, which gives you the ability to exit the grid or buy power wherever you want to buy it. So let's talk about
retail
that.
market.
Open retail market. Thank you. That's what makes Stan such a great host.
I got my jargon. Yeah, I got my jargon.
Stan just keeps like guideposts for all of us, like throwing that in the ground.
So I think it's important that people understand some other states have tried deregulation, and they can go look at those states' websites and Google it if you want. What other states have deregulated? Sure.
And let me just step back for a second and just make sure again that we are sort of putting that stake in the ground for what the Energy Choice Initiative is. If you look at the actual ballot measure, it says that anybody has the right to choose the provider of its electric utility services, including but not limited to selecting providers from a competitive retail electric market or by producing electricity for themselves or in association with others, and shall not be forced to purchase energy from one provider. So that's the system we have now. We talked about that earlier. NV Energy is our exclusive franchise. However, in exchange for being our exclusive franchise, they are regulated. So it is not just a monopoly that is unregulated. It is a regulated monopoly. So the PUC tells them what they can charge, what they can recover. In an open market, that does not exist. The PUC would cease to regulate to a large extent our energy market, and a lot of it would go to the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, FERC. So something else to keep in mind. So other states, and I just, again, want to sort of put a stake in the ground on some resources. So one of them is the Governor's Office of Energy. The committee studied this for 18 months, came out with a set of recommendations. If you go and you look under programs, it will lead you to the Committee on Energy Choice. Another one is the Public Utility Commission. They did an entire docket 17-10001. They have a report, and that report may also be on the Governor's Office of Energy. But you can go and you can take a look at their 132 pages. They got 5,000 pages of testimony. They had 10 days of oral testimony. So that's another really good resource. And then finally, the Gwynn Center did a study on this as well, and that's gwyncenter.org. You can look at all of their policy papers on all the ballot initiatives that are coming out, and they've got a really detailed report. A lot of the other states, a couple other things to know about this. Nobody has tried to deregulate their retail market. So again, this is for the mass market. In 20 years, nobody has ever done it by a constitutional amendment. And we mentioned that earlier, but it is important to just remember that question 6 and question 3 seek to amend our Constitution to put in these rights. And nobody's done it with the level of penetration of rooftop solar that we have in the state, which I think is a really interesting question. So you can if you look at any of those resources, they will talk about some of the other states that have opened up their markets. The ones that people keep looking at are Texas, Pennsylvania, as being very successful models. What we learned on the Energy Choice Commission is that states like Massachusetts, states like Illinois, states like New York have been really evaluating the merits of the open market and whether or not there are things they need to hem in to protect consumers from those retail suppliers. Massachusetts, for example, did a significant study showing that there were very large-scale abuses by those retail suppliers that were selling into the mass market. But, that we have, if question 3 were to pass, we have that opportunity to learn from all of those states and what they did wrong and how we could make a better market. Maine, Maryland, Ohio, those are all states that are open as well. So
I want to point out again that if we have listeners with questions, you can surely call in at 702-257-KDWN. That's 702-257-5396. And our Facebook Live listeners, we are live, so send us a question if you have any.
Yeah.
Stan?
And I think if question 3 does pass, it would take 5 years at least to implement it. You'd have 3 more legislative sessions since we meet every 2 years
Yep.
to craft the actual market. Question 3 doesn't give an outline of what that market's going to look like. It would be up to the legislators to do
that's
that.
right.
Cool. So,
And then also, NV Energy would still be involved in the transmission and distribution. So you would still be getting a bill from NV Energy even if you had an open.
well, that's good,
Right.
Stan. But we need to be clear. This is about generation,
Right.
not transportation or distribution.
Right. So you would have your company that you purchase your generation from. You'd get a bill from them, and then you would still be paying for your distribution and transmission from NV Energy because this initiative does not seek to unbundle that generation or that distribution and transmission piece.
And what is transmission and distribution for the real Gumbies out there?
Transmission and distribution is basically how you...
It's those lines out there
lines
running
and
down the
wires.
street as
That's right.
transportation. And the distribution is from the transformer
The
over to your
substation.
house
Yep.
and the meters.
That's right.
So that is all owned by NV Energy right now. And if another company is providing the generation of your power, you're still using NV Energy's poles and meters.
Wires. And it'd be very much like way back. I don't know if anybody remembers when we opened up the market on telecom. There were I remember when I was
AT&T,
a baby lawyer doing work about what we could charge and what could be done because you were still buying your service off the lines and wires of AT&T. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly the analogy to that, but it's in terms of the cost of it because it's a little bit different, but it's something for people to just sort of grapple with and understand from a private experience.
And like back then, if you will, suddenly we have all these companies and you don't know, who do I pick? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So, and then now, here we are, however many years later, we're down to a handful of companies, and it's much easier to go out there and make a choice. Who do I want to have my cellular service with? Because now it all kind of makes sense. But in those early days, there was so much going on that you didn't know who to work with.
Right.
Yeah.
And because of that, there was a lot of, I think, hiccups and bumps in the road in terms of making sure that consumers were not being bilked when there were that many cell providers to choose from. So we're really going to be leaning, if question 3 passes, we will need to lean very heavily on our Public Utility Commission to implement a strong set of regulations for consumer protection.
So there are no guarantees when question 3 were to pass or not pass. What's going to happen? It's all up in the air.
That's right.
Almost like an experiment.
I think that's a fair statement. It's all going to be, somebody's going to say, hey, go get this cake, but nobody's going to tell you what goes into the bowl for the recipe. So...
That's a good analogy. And throw some candles on that bad boy, and let's have a party.
Right.
So I think it's very important to continue to reiterate how people can find information on this because people need to make up their own minds, and we're trying to stay neutral here and just give you the facts, ma'am.
Right. So another place people can go, there was just last Tuesday a debate, essentially, between Assemblyman Chris Brooks and John Wellinghoff, who is one of the consultants to the Yes on 3 campaign.
And former FERC
commissioner. Former FERC commissioner. But I do think it's important to point out also that he is one of the paid consultants for the Yes on 3 campaign. But he's, he knows this stuff, up and down. And it was done through the Nevada Independent. And if you go to the Nevada Independent website, they will have links to their indie forums that you can check out.
So Nevada Independent. And
correct.
They got a website.
It's an online newspaper up in Reno.
Okay.
So everybody do their research. Remember, the energy policy doesn't work in bullet points. And we'll see you on the other side of the election.
It's a big narrative. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to Shades of Green on KDWN.